hasn't started yet. Well, it's started now.
Welcome to the Quantum Show with your host, Quantum.
I'm just gonna get a DPR recording and just play Magic Sandwich, just play Supernatural Side Salad over that, so I don't have to do these bloody things. Anyway, it is another fortnightly edition of the Supernatural Side Salad Show, and we're going to stick fairly closely, I think, this week to the topics that were covered last week because they were fairly interesting. Just one thing, a lot of people have been asking me about whether this Supernatural Side Salad Show is going to be moving on to its own channel. It is, and I have made the YouTube channel. And what I want to do is I want to slowly phase towards that, including improving the website, that sort of thing. So I'm setting the end of September as a sort of date. It's a long way off, but I want to do things properly. So if people could subscribe to that channel, it would help me, because in the unlikely event we get 500 subscribers, it will mean that we can get a custom URL. Anyway, let's move on. So the Magic Sandwich Show last fortnight was on last week was on the dinosaur denialist type thing, and the idea. Do people know much about this? The idea that it was just a conspiracy, and it was archaeologists just digging up stuff and making it up, and the stuff I was talking about. Do people?
I kind of know something about it. Am I hearable?
You
Yeah.
are.
Alright, because I wasn't sure if everything was plugged in right. I did kind of watch the show last weekend, but I had been drinking, so I kind of half heard about it. But I do know something about the past when I talked to a guy that's about 20 years ago, and he basically said to me that all the fossils were put in the ground, put in the earth by the devil to deceive us. And I'm kind of guessing what I figured of this lady with her video and the stone she threw on the table, that was the topic.
And it was the generic idea that it was a whole sort of conspiracy theory that it's being hidden. The evidence is being hidden to show that it's not God or whatever. It's the same sort of story, really.
Yeah, actually, you see them all around in all kind of different ways, and this was her interpretation, and some people say it's the devil that did it, and her interpretation was more to the kind of the scientists don't know how to get the bones out of the rocks, because that was basically what her video was about. That all the chipping on the rocks, and that was all made up and fuzzy. That was her conspiracy theory, and it's ridiculous, of course, because who is she to tell the scientists how to do their job?
She displayed that she didn't understand the procedure at all, or the process.
Yeah, that was
She
very
displayed that she
obvious.
had no idea how to do it, because that's obviously not how they do it. They don't just get a spade and shovel and dig it out of the ground and make shapes, and it's not Play-Doh sort of thing.
Did get it right that it wasn't actually the bone, it was something that's been fossilized, so she did at least get that right, and then I understand it went rapidly downhill from there. I mean, the idea that you need a complete skeleton in order to use it as evidence or something, and of course then I pointed out that we have actually found complete dinosaur skeletons, dinosaur fossils.
Oh, that old argument has been used by countless apologists that don't understand the science. I mean, it's pathetic the way they try to strawman everything.
Her video, though, the other one was clearly, it was clearly just a spoof, or it was a joke. I mean, the one about the interview with the guy during the Queensland flood. Yeah, Queensland, it was a cyclone, I think. There's two, actually. So I'm not sure whether that was put there to sort of, I guess, maybe brush away from the fact that she had made a silly video. So if you put a obviously silly video on the same channel, then it's sort of, you're not going to really take the other one as seriously, which is probably the idea behind it. Unless, of course, she is just trolling altogether, and it's obvious. But I'm not sure.
But sometimes it's difficult to find out if somebody's trolling, and that was also Aaron Ra's observation, because he talked to her before that, and I haven't seen that particular part in which he interviewed her, but he wasn't sure if she was genuine or not, because he also investigated the website, and he saw that some videos and remarks were obviously trolling, but her video seemed so sincere that you couldn't be sure if she was trolling or not. And I also recall an incident a few years ago that basically shows that there are people that are basically professional trolls, and I don't know if you recall it, so I'll just mention it shortly. But a few years ago, during the tsunami in Japan, there was a girl called Pamela or something like that, and she said that it was basically God cursing the Japanese or punishing the Japanese for the sins that they did, and blah blah blah. And there was a worldwide uproar on Twitter and on YouTube with counter videos and all that against her. But in the end, it turned out that she was basically trolling, and everything she did was a hoax, and there was even a special website behind it, with a forum and where she and all the other hoaxers were laughing about the stupidity of the other people who were responding towards this so sincerely. So I don't know. Basically, perhaps it's a hobby of these guys. I don't know.
I mean, to some extent, I really don't think it matters whether or not it's a troll or whether it's genuine, because the reason that these trolls exist is because there are people that genuinely believe this sort of thing. So it really doesn't matter if you're attacking a troll and they turn out to be just trolling you. The principle is still valid because there are actually people that believe this sort of thing. I'm sure even if she's trolling, then there are some people in this organisation that genuinely believe that it's some sort of conspiracy. I mean, I've heard much stranger things than this.
Yeah. Like I said, about 20 years ago, I met a guy who basically said that it was the devil who put all the fossils in the ground with an attempt to deceive us and to take us away from God. So it's really silly, but those people do exist indeed. Yeah.
Thou shalt not dig into the ground to discover evidences of our history. That's a commandment, right?
But why would God put in evidence in order to sort of convince people that he doesn't exist? I don't understand that. Or was it? Is it? I mean, it's the devil, isn't it? But I thought God is supposed to control the devil or be more powerful than the devil, so he still allows it to happen.
I get tired of even arguing with people who, hold that sort of position. I mean, I don't mind having an argument with people who believe in God.
Yeah,
who
that's
just
basically
don't sort of, who want to. I mean, you can't deny actual evidence. Like, I mean, the age of the universe, or the age of the Earth, at least, for the very most part, is it's pretty accurate. I mean, how we know. I mean, it's just to deny that. I mean, I can't have a conversation. It's hard to have a conversation with someone like that because it's where's your ground for, truth, really.
well, it's basically impossible to have a conversation with people like that because the devil's always going to do something now, isn't he? He's always getting, everywhere.
And it's the quickest way to counter the opposition. You simply by just saying, well, the devil is deceiving you, then you have to give no answers at all, basically.
Well, it's exactly like conspiracy theorists, right? Like anything that goes with them is on their side, and anybody or anything that speaks out against them is immediately part of the conspiracy.
Part of the conspiracy.
Right, yeah, it's exactly. It's well, I'm not really sure if that's. How much is Monsanto paying you? Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Did you hear? I don't know if this was a troll either, but I saw some posts from a particular page called it's Illuminati or something like that, and it said that the blue dress, gold dress thing, which I'm not even sure if any of you saw it. I hope you didn't.
I've been avoiding it.
Yeah, well, there's a whole group, and they're saying that was the Illuminati testing their control over social media,
But
like
I
how
did
many people they could like influence.
Don't butterflies do the same thing?
I did came across a news website, I think, that said something about the blue dress and the gold dress, but I didn't click it, so I have no idea what that would be about.
I think they have the Illuminati confused with Facebook.
Yeah, pretty much, and Instagram, which is now the same thing because they bought Instagram, so it's all
I think we should do the dress test. Incidentally, I'm just going to find a
What do
picture
you
of
mean
that. And then,
do the test? It's not a test.
well, I'm just interested to see what color people see it as. So I'm going to find it and then put it on the screen.
But isn't this is the point? Like, it's supposed to be troll amongst the group.
I don't.
Always
It's
to
not.
be two people or something that say that they see blue and black.
I don't think it's. I did originally think that this was some sort of troll or PR stunt or an April Fool's joke in March or whatever. But I think it is real. I think people do see different colours in this.
Yeah, people do see different colors, but that's because of the background lighting you have on the dress. If you Photoshop it that away, you can clearly see it's blue and black. But if you have different lightings, like you have in a picture, you can see different colors. There's lots of different visual tricks and little graphic pictures you can show people where you see like a chessboard kind of arrangement, and if you move an object to near one of the cubes, it can change color, and if you move that object away, it's black again. If you move the object, it's gray. So it's a known effect, but just now on a dress, which suddenly makes it more interesting for your Facebook, apparently.
Well, it's funny because I'm actually colorblind, but it seems that people that are colorblind to a degree can sometimes see a pattern in a meshy color spectrum that people that are not colorblind can't see. It's very strange how that works.
It's funny you mentioned that. Either one of my eyes sees color slightly differently, so I'll often have situations where someone will say, well, this is clearly a green shirt, say, and I'll say, well, it looks green, but it could also be brown, and I'm not quite sure what it is. There's a certain color range where if I close my left eye, I see more of the green, whereas if I close my right eye, I see more of the brownish red spectrum. It's interesting how but when I see things with both eyes, it varies depending upon the shade. But perception is really strange that way, and especially when you're dealing with biology and receptors and neurons and everything else, you can see a whole wide range of things, I guess. What I was saying earlier was I wonder if I haven't seen much about this dress, but I wonder if it kind of went along the line of the way butterfly scales work, in that they refract a certain amount of light at different angles. So depending upon the wavelength of light hitting them versus which way they diffract would determine which way or which color you actually see.
Yeah, but I mean, this whole idea about Illuminati controlling social media. I mean, I don't know. Alex Jones material.
Those people
I thought
just
that was a given.
Yeah, sometimes it's amazing to see how short of a time it takes for people to respond and come up with all these crazy theories. Because I recall, and Joris, Jean would recall this too, probably, that when the MH17 plane crashed, it didn't take 2-3 hours for all kinds of conspiracy theories to rise up out of nowhere.
Yeah, and there still are, and complaining about whether or not the plane should have flown over the area, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So the government and
Okay, so what color do people see then?
I see
brown,
brown
black, and blue.
White and gold.
Yeah, white and gold. I just always see white and gold. So.
I see brown and blue.
Yeah, that's because of there's an orange light up and above the dress shining down upon it. That's probably why you see brown.
But how do you not see that? How do you see the dress without seeing that on the dress? Does that make sense?
I see an orange and kind of pinkish color, kind of white pinkish.
Can you put it up again?
It's up now. Can't you see it on the screen share?
Just click on.
Quantum needs to be
click on
talking.
Quantum's.
Okay.
Yeah, we can just,
I've clicked on it, so it should be showing for everyone.
yeah, it is now.
Okay. I see white and gold instantly.
Brown and blue. Or
So I
like
mean,
lavender and puke. I don't know, something like that.
So I mean, it's not a chol. People genuinely do see different colors.
Yes, if you look in the lower left, there's an example of white and black. There's another dress there. You can see what a reference color in the picture. I don't know if that changes it for you.
I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
when I look at the reference picture, I can see like around the white sort of jacket part where there's some black there, but I would still say that I can still see the gold. That's why it just sort of.
I'm not
doesn't
so
really-
sure it has anything to do with the eyes as the quality of your computer screen, or maybe an effect of both.
I mean, clearly, if people are seeing this differently, then it's not just the digital effect everyone is seeing.
Yeah, but like I said, I'm colorblind for large part, so maybe that could have an effect too, why people see different things. And like yours, I think said, there are different levels of color blindness too. So.
Okay. Well, broadly there's three different types of color.
On background lighting and contrast as to what you see, you think most people. We see the same information, but your mind also processes this information, of course, and most of the time applies a couple of handy tricks it knows, and I think that's why you can see different colors, even though it's of course one of them.
It makes it that I was just trying to think about. There was a question, and it was what is a color like, and I mean. Sort of interesting to think about, but I mean, especially when you talk about someone's colorblind, I suppose it is a thing. It is its own thing. Like blue is blue because, as you say, even someone who's colorblind, it's simply a matter of the brain interprets whatever that is as something else. Like it might be a darker shade of blue or something like that. But it's sort of, I think that sort of.
Well, there's an interesting.
Has to be.
So there's an interesting kind of problem in philosophy is that you can't. It's impossible to determine what you see when you see the color green as compared to what I see when I see the color green. I know the color green, and I know you know what the color green is, but I don't know what you see, and there's no way I can possibly know what you actually see.
Yeah, but it's also an interesting question because when you walk into a forest and you see a bush and they ask you what color is that bush and you say it's green, but basically that bush is every color within the visual spectrum but green, because the color that is reflected back is the color you see, but it's not the color that makes the bush.
No, but when you describe the bush as being green, you are describing the colour that it's predominantly reflecting. I mean
Yeah.
that's what we mean when we say this object is this colour. It reflects a certain wavelength of light more than it reflects the others. Anyway, to answer your point, I think this is known as qualia, but I think there is a way of testing it, because if it was true that everyone saw different colours completely differently, in the way that you're suggesting. So I mean, obviously, blue light is still blue light. Everyone sees blue, but what they think of blue might be different as what someone else thinks of it. But the difficulty I have here is, if this was true, then people would have very different opinions on which colours complement each other. So, for instance, while some people might think that a rainbow of colours works very nicely, a lot of other people would think it horribly clashes. And I don't think we see that. I think most people would agree that a rainbow is a very nice. Each colour in the rainbow complements itself very well.
That's if the differences in between people was so starkly contrast. Like if we all saw blue, but it's slightly different blue, I mean, it's still going to go well with whatever other color I suppose, and it's still going to look good against roughly what black looks like. There's still that possibility. I mean, I don't think that completely rules that out, for example.
But you have to recognize too that there are different kinds of vision. You have an ability to see color, but you have also an ability to see movement. Predators have that ability, but you also have an ability to see shade, and you have an ability to see basically only dark and bright colors. So there are a lot of different ways to see things, but you can also test the ability of a creature to see the difference between two colors like blue and green, because we know there are certain animals that don't see that difference, and the way they discovered that these animals don't see the difference between the color blue and green is when you put a test to them, which they can get a treat like some food. And when you have different colored boxes, for example, and some boxes are green and some boxes are blue and some boxes are yellow, and you teach the animal basically that there is always the biggest amount of food in the blue box, then a creature that can't see the difference between green and blue will also grab the green box and the blue box, because he thinks there's a treat in there, because he can't see the difference in color. So that's a way in which you can test a creature's ability to see colors and compare it to your own perspective of colors.
It's not the same thing as what the person was saying. I mean the ability to see different wavelengths, different intensities, that sort of thing. Those are intrinsic properties that we can measure, and we know that different animals see different colours. I think that the point that I can't remember who it was more of a philosophical point. Is my green the same as your green? When I see green, perhaps you see a colour that looks to me like it's red, for example. But I mean, in the sense that, whereas what you're saying is we know that certain creatures can see different wavelengths better, because that's something that can easily be measured.
Yeah, exactly. But like I say, there are different ways of seeing things, because it's also known scientific experiment in which they asked people to determine brightness. Because you enter a dark room and you see a green light and you see a red light, and they ask the people to tell them which is the brightest light. And I don't recall exactly which light it was in that case, but they often pick the wrong light, because your own brain, although your eye may see that the green light, for example, is the brighter color, your eyes adapt to it, because you don't always 100% see what your eyes observe, because your brain, I don't know the correct English word, adapts the input from your eyes, so you perceive it differently.
Well, I'm trying to find a video. I think I have it now. There's a tribe in Africa, and when you make them do a test, which includes a circle of squares, each with a color, and if you have them, I think all of them, if you let Western people try it, they can see, of course, see green, green, green. Oh, a blue one. That one is different. If you let the tribes people do it, they cannot distinguish the color blue between the color green, or those colors. So if you ask them which of these is a different color, they can't see it. You show them a circle of green squares, which one of them is slightly different. The researchers couldn't differentiate which ones there were, but every one of the tribes people was, oh, that one is different. So even though it looks to us, to most people, that there's just a ring of green squares, one of them is apparently different in their language and their head. And if you let them do a test which one of them is blue, they cannot see the difference. And we all think, what, are they crazy or something? You can clearly see that one is different. So even though, so that's an interesting observation in what colors are. So it's very strange, actually.
I have a question. So are colors objective? And anybody who's qualified, it sounds like Quantum, sounds like you really know what you're talking about here. Is there an objective, like red? Like if we built a camera that, or is color by definition something that just is completely subjective? Like
There's
based on
white
it's
and black. White and black. White is the absence of color, or I mean, or wait, what's it? White is all colors, and black is the absence of color.
I mean, yes. I mean, clearly, color is completely objective because you can measure it. You can take a pure red light and measure its wavelength, and then just by knowing its wavelength, you can tell that it's red. The discussion that we had earlier was slightly separate from that, and it was just does your brain perceive color differently? But color is a property that's just. I suppose you could argue that color is subjective and wavelength is objective, but to be honest, to me, I'd say that color is very objective because it's basically just the same as knowing what the frequency or wavelength of the light is.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I hadn't really looked in really.
My question is, if we define red as some given wavelength, we're all seeing a slightly different red, I'm presuming, but I guess my question is that what it looks like? Is that what it actually looks like? Because we always have to interpret it.
Oh, no, that's what George was sort of touching on before, like bush, like when you go into the forest and there's a bush there, the actual color of the bush, like you might describe it as green, but that's the color, what we describe as the reflection, the color that reflects off the object. So the actual object itself would be a different color.
Yeah, because basically the object observes the observes is the wrong word. The sunlight touches the object, and some of the frequency of the light gets not observed. What's the English word? I can't.
Absorbed.
Absorbed, that's the word. Absorbed into the object, and we only see the visual, the frequency parts of the visual spectrum that does not get absorbed by the object, but reflected from it, and that's what we see. So the actually object is never the color than what we see it. We think it to be.
If I can go on to just try and answer your question. When you say what colour an actual object is, I think the easiest way to define this is that the colour of an object is simply a map, a graph of all the frequencies that it reflects by intensity. So you'll get a frequency distribution. So an object will reflect a load of different frequencies, but of course it will depend on the ambient light source as well. This is part of the problem. The colour will change depending on the ambient light source. So, for example, a a blue dress in red light will probably look red, because the blue dress will reflect some red light, even though it tends to reflect more blue light than it reflects red light. If you've got a pure red source, then it will only be able to reflect red light, so that you will see the dress as being red. So of course, this is part of the problem, because colour depends on the ambient light source as well as the properties of the material. So in order to simplify this problem, it's probably better to just ignore that and look at colours of light rather than colours of objects, because then you don't have this problem. So if you look, so it'd be like, say, comparing the colour of a red laser and a green laser, because lasers are fairly straightforward because they only emit one frequency of light. So a red laser is a different colour to a green laser because they emit different frequencies. Now you can complicate this problem by looking at a light source that emits more than one sort of frequency, perhaps with a different intensity distribution. So the sun has a sort of Boltzmann type intensity distribution. It emits lots of different intensities it emits light at lots of different intensities, and the reason for this is because the sun's really hot, and hot objects emit light. Obviously, I mean, the objects around us are emitting light, but it's all in the infrared region, so we can't actually see it. But the hotter the object becomes, the more it shifts over to higher frequencies. So the sun emits in the visible spectrum because it's very hot. So that you get a sort of continuous Boltzmann curve. So the sun appears as white. I mean, if you were looking at it in space, it would be white because it emits all these different frequencies, which the sum of which look like they're white. But of course, it's even more complicated than that, because you also have absorption and emission spectra. So the sun isn't purely just a sort of continuous distribution, because you also have these. It's not just the fact that the object is a black body. There's also elements in the sun that emit certain specific frequencies of light. I think this is how basically helium was discovered. You can see emission spectra from helium in the sun. Anyway, the point. This is a long-winded point, but the point I'm trying to make is that it's quite complicated because it depends on the ambient light source, the intrinsic qualities of the material, and even for normal, even just when you're looking at a light source, the intensity distributions can be very, very different. They can be Boltzmann, or they can be very specific emission or absorption spectra.
One thing I was going to say that's very good teaching of the process of actual colours. What I was going to say was getting back to away from that side of it, and then talking about, I suppose, more about how you experience a colour, I guess, would be to say favourite colours. Like, why is it that you prefer, I mean, someone prefers, they really like the colour red, some people can't stand the colour red. Their experience of the colour has got to be different because it's not associated with, like, it doesn't look good to the, does that make some sort of sense? Like, so in that way, there's sort of a difference, possibly.
I think you were touching on the same point I made earlier, that if people like colours differently, then that might be some very weak evidence that we're actually seeing different things, despite obviously the same wavelength entering our eyes. To be honest, though, is there any real objective reason why we would see colours differently? I mean, we all have. I mean, obviously, it's got nothing to do with our eyes, because our eyes basically have three different pigments that are the same for everyone, really. You have your three different pigments. Then, of course, you have your cones that can see brightness. Sorry, not your cones, your rods that can see brightness, and that's about it. So it's got nothing to do with differences in the eye.
Well, then it would have to be patterns that form in the brain, different pathways leading to different sort of logical outcomes.
Well, one thing that immediately comes to my mind is if you think about, well, I can give you a perfect example. I have two kids, and we have quite a bit of land, and on our land grows a great number of different types of berries. Blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, all kinds of different things. And throughout the season, these things mature at different rates, and as they mature, they change color. So my kids, as they've grown, have figured out that the raspberries have a certain amount of time before they reach the peak of sweetness. So there's a point at which the berry is tart, and there's a point at which the berry is maximally sweet before it becomes kind of super sweet, kind of gross tasting and mushy. And they want to make sure that they maximize the amount of those best berries, those super sweet ones. And they know that if they leave the ones that are not quite as sweet alone, that tomorrow those berries will be sweeter. So they've learned to discern over time varying shades of reds and blues and blacks such that they can have the best fruit every day as opposed to having the most amount at one time. So rather than eat every berry in sight on day one, they might eat the best 5 today, the next best 5 tomorrow when they're a little more ripe, and so on and so forth throughout the week. And as the season goes on, this goes from one berry to a different kind of berry to another kind of berry, so that they're always eating the absolutely best fruit at the best time. So from an evolutionary standpoint, you can see why maybe being able to discern color very acutely would aid you in gaining higher nutrition or being able to have a diet that maximizes your chance of survival.
Does anyone else know anything about this? Because it's not something I've really considered.
Well, that's an interesting point you raised, because when you look at the food industry, and I didn't know that, but basically butter, for instance, the natural color of butter is not yellow, what we think it is, but it seems to be gray. But they add food particles or coloring to it because we respond more to particular colors of our food. So that's basically exactly what he said. Because if you're trying to sell yellow butter or gray butter, people will go for the yellow butter because they think that's a healthier and better food than the gray butter.
That's absolutely spot on. The odd part about that is that the reason that you're craving a yellow butter over a gray butter is that butter derived from a cow or a goat or a ewe that's fed on a natural diet will actually have more yellow to it. When you have nutrient-dense foods, they tend to be more rich in color. And so an egg that you would buy from your commercial grocery store kind of has like a pale yellow color. And a lot of times you'll see commercials on TV that say, oh, we'll buy our eggs and look at the color of our eggs over the other egg. Well, what they do is they add certain coloring agents to the feed that makes the yolk actually yellow. But what's interesting is if you allow a chicken to grow on pasture where they have the ability to eat pretty much the wild food they would have, I guess, naturally, their yolks will be almost so orange it borders on being red.
I can vouch for this because I actually had some of these last night. Because what you're saying is absolutely true. I bought some of these wild chicken eggs, and you won't believe the difference. Not just in terms of color, but in terms of taste. They are very dark orange, sort of.
And they stand up in the pan, right? When you crack them, they stand right up, nice and tall.
I've noticed that they have a much sort of richer flavor as well.
But that's your natural instincts are to say, oh, I want bright colored foods. I want bright fats. I want my eggs to be rich and orange because they taste better. They have more nutritional content. What you're tasting there is that nutrient density in your food, and there's one of two ways to market that product. It's to actually either have the product be nutrient dense or to make it look that way by artificially coloring it the way that you would have it, if instinctually. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. The thing is, though, I think we all acknowledge that a balanced diet is a good thing. I mean, and the color the colour of food is going to be caused by various different pigments. I mean, in carrots, the orange is caused by carotene, for instance. So it kind of makes sense that we would want to have lots and lots of different colours, because that would involve lots of different organic molecules, each presumably having some sort of utility. So I can understand why having a diet in lots of different colours sort of makes sense.
It makes me wonder how poi poi, the Hawaiian drink, ever got made then.
I think a lot of those things come out of starvation, actually. A lot of these staple diets that are starchy, very dense calorically, but not necessarily appealing unless you add something extra to them. I think those come out of a starvation mode. A lot of things like wheat and soy and grains, they're meant to keep for long periods of time, and especially in temperate climates where you don't have the ability to grow food throughout the entire year. Those are the things that get you through. But the preference is to have fresh and natural food, as much as natural and fresh as they can be, and then to preserve what's left for the period of time in which you can't grow food. And it seems to bear out that if you have the availability, that people tend towards those types of foods.
I think there's a risk here of going because of being sort of a little bit dogmatic about things that are natural are good. I mean, I know this works most of the time because ideally you don't want to be eating foods that have got pesticides in them. I mean, that's just down to reason. But things like GM foods, which I mean, GM foods are clearly engineered by humans, so they're not natural. But GM foods are actually a very, very good idea, and probably they're more healthy than natural foods because you can engineer them to, for example, contain less LDL, cholesterol, that sort of thing. So genetically modified foods are a pretty good idea, and they're not natural at all. In the same respect, a modification of food, such as milk pasteurization, is a good idea.
Well, I'd just like to say that, what is natural, because if you break everything down to the atoms, everything is natural, but I think it would be more valid to say the atoms in these items mesh better with the atoms in my body.
Political atomists.
It's not really so much that. I mean, when people say something's natural, all they mean is that there's not really been any human intervention to a point. I mean, clearly for some things that have been, clearly for instance for bananas. I mean, bananas aren't natural because natural bananas look. There's been this whole selection breeding process that's been going on for thousands of years. But I think when people say natural, they mean natural to a point where. And the more natural something is, the less human intervention there's been. I think that's generally the point. So
yeah,
for
which is interesting. People do it as well with like athletes and stuff. Like, they're a natural, and yet it's clearly the ones that are doing, the extra training and the specific things. More intervention. In other words, so like you're saying, it's sort of like, non-natural, genetically modified, perfect foods in some sense would ultimately be better.
I mean, one big aspect, one big pseudoscientific mistake is the dichotomy of natural things are good, human modified things are. I mean, in fact, in most cases that's simply not true because our life expectancy now is higher than it's ever been in the past. I mean, human modification is nearly all the time a good thing, but in the case in the case of food, sometimes it can be an exception, but only because natural foods tend to be more expensive and more difficult to produce. So more shortcuts are taken simply so that they can be economized. So, for instance, battery chicken are cheaper than free-range organic chicken. And so the human modification is got nothing to do with improving the quality of the food.
it's more to do with making it cheaper. So in this sense, it's fully understandable why a natural free-range organic chicken is probably better for you than a battery one, and obviously more ethical as well. And it's got nothing to do with it being unnatural. It's to do with the fact that it's unnatural for the purposes of being cheaper, mostly, I think.
I don't want to suggest that that natural necessarily has any certain connotation to it. I guess everything is natural, like was being said. For me, I guess I look at it from a systemic sort of perspective, where it's not necessarily about whether or not battery chicken is better than a free-range chicken or is better than the somewhere in between chicken. Clearly there's one that's better for the chicken. Clearly there's one that's better for the wallet. But when you look at it overall, you also have to take into consideration the waste that's made along the way. So in regards to something like, let's say, GMO corn, I'm not necessarily against genetically modified crops. I'm more concerned about what making genetically modified crops enables us to do to those crops. So in the case of GMO corn, you can take these seeds, put them in the ground, and they're automatically engineered such that they're not susceptible to certain pesticides or herbicides, so that farmers can essentially run them over with herbicides and fungicides and pesticides repeatedly throughout the season, and it'll kill out all the competition, and only the corn will grow. For me, that sounds like it's running over the entire ecology to a point where you have an entirely sterile field. You end up with a really high yield of corn. Now, whether or not you want to eat that amount of herbicide and pesticide and everything else is, I guess that's one's personal decision. But to me, it seems like what's happening is it's you're eradicating the entire ecology except for this one organism, and then what you're expected to do is at some point or another, when the weeds become resistant, when the pests become resistant, when the fungi become resistant to the things you're spraying on them, you're expected to somehow fix that land, and that land at that point is ruined. I mean, it's just wrecked, and there's nothing you can do with it until you've leached out all of those things that you've dumped on it. I agree that they create nutritious food for people who are in need of nutritious food. For me, it's more a point of you're creating a really big problem in one area and shipping the product to a bunch of other smaller areas, when you can maybe localize those things and not necessarily have to rely on a lot of chemistry and a lot of destruction in the name of keeping things cheap.
Well,
do you mind?
no, go ahead.
Well, I would just like to say that there is another spectrum on the other side. There's this like natural, organic food grown without pesticides. What if it gets a disease? What if that makes it out to the to the consumer? Pesticides. Not only kill weeds, they kill weeds that make diseases, destroy crops, and spread that infect the weeds and bugs that infect the crop with diseases and whatnot.
Well, I'm currently studying biology at a university, and I'm following a course right now that's called Biotechnology and Society, and we're talking about the two commercially available strains of GMO crops, and one of them is BT crops, or bacterial thuringiensis crops, and I understand what you're saying, but what that crop does is just express a toxin. In this case for bacteria, but if you let the plant do it itself, okay, you don't have to spray it on, and that's nice. But if what happens in biological farming and industrial farming when not using these GMOs is they add this bacteria that produces this toxin, they add it to the crops, and they just spray it on the crops. The bacteria lives on the plant and excretes toxin. Plant is protected from the bacteria. But so that I don't see a real difference between letting the plant make it itself and adding it later. So it's maybe, as you say, it's maybe not terribly good for the ground, but that's maybe something we have to take. We'll have to accept if we want to industrially grow crops for food.
I think that exactly. You point out the exact issue where I see it is the industrialization of crops. A lot of times, folks say, we got to worry about climate change. There's a lot of things we have to worry about. Energy. There's lots of things to consider in these realms. And we have to feed the world, we have to feed a growing population, and it seems to me that industry has had the answer for a very long time, and it's taken a toll on the environment, it's taken a toll on climate, to the point where I think 90-something% of people kind of agree, or reasonable people kind of agree, that something needs to be done. For me, the big problem with large industrial cropping is that there's a huge impact on the land itself in that you have to do a lot of support in order to just keep it producing, such that you can remove that crop and ship it all over the United States, all over the world, all over wherever it needs to go. You're taking nutrients out of the soil and moving it to another place to feed people, and we're not returning those nutrients. We're returning nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to the soil, and some micronutrients, and then we're making plants more tolerant to having lower amounts of those nutrients. But the big thing for me at this point, I think, becomes the energy expenditure in getting that stuff shipped everywhere, and where I think we can make the biggest leaps and bounds is in making smaller crops. And diversifying cropping such that one farmer doesn't grow 1,000 acres of corn, but rather maybe 10 100-acre crops, all diversified, so that if any one crop should fail, he still has the other 90% that he can still get to market.
But
and do so in a reasonable way.
Can't a farmer just choose to do that as is if it was more profitable for him or more? Somebody's mic's really loud.
It's possible to do and make it more profitable. The problem is right now, I think that we're in a system that makes it easy to just spray and ignore the fact that we're still removing nutrients from the soil.
I completely disagree. I completely disagree with that. If that was what was more profitable, then a farmer would choose to do that. If that was what was more expedient for him, I don't see what's stopping him from doing so. It's not necessarily a level of ease to say that a farmer chooses to grow 10,000 acres of one crop versus 1,000 acres of another crop, or 1,000 10-acre crops. I think a farmer would choose to grow all corn because that's what's most expedient for him. Because if you're diversifying crops like that, each crop has a different requirements, and that it might be more costly for a farmer to give attention to 1,000 different crops as opposed to just one methodology in place to deal with one crop.
Absolutely.
A localized food argument is great for people that have land, but like somebody else said, we've got a world to feed, and let somebody go a couple weeks with an increased price in corn or an increased price in wheat, and that'll drastically affect their eating habits and their budget and their ability to sustain themselves. So I'm a pretty big advocate of the system as it is, to be honest.
I just like to say that crop rotation is a commonplace thing. They'll change out crops, and different crops will feed different nutrients, feed off different nutrients, and allow the other nutrients to rebuild. So it's a pretty common practice.
Well, what I think we're doing, as far as I know, reasonably well with diversifying crops and managing the impact on the soil, but what I think we're not doing as well, and there's legitimate reasons for that, is the accepting of GM crops, because as the population numbers increase, land which can be used for agriculture decreases, and especially now with the global warming, of course, it also decreases the amount of accessible land either by flooding or extreme weather conditions, and we need to find a solution where we can have less suitable ground but more food production. I know there's lots of research now in developing strains of rice that can grow in areas which regularly get flooded, and they have pretty far development in those areas. But the problem is, especially in Europe and other such places, GM crops are completely distrusted, and there's a strain of rice which is called golden rice, and which produces a lot of vitamin A, which can help a lot of people. The only problem is it's not allowed to be sold and grown. And these kinds of, when you ask me those kinds, we can make a lot of progress in these kind of areas, and if we allow these kind of GM crops to be grown, and we can increase the amount of food we produce without using more land and decreasing the nutrients in the grounds of certain places, if we can produce more with less. I think that's the direction we need to head.
Why is that the case in Europe right now, that GM crops are so distrusted? Is it just sort of like the vax movement here in America? It just becomes like sort of a cultural thing where people just distrust it, or is there like evidence behind it, or why do people distrust it?
Well, there's a couple of reasons people distrust it. First of all, I don't actually really know, but there's a couple of reasons you can. People are afraid if you with current GMO techniques is that you don't completely know what you're doing, which there's certain aspects of truth to that. You don't know if you insert a gene into a plant exactly where it goes, so you don't know if there may be a strange effect from that. But I don't think that's a huge problem if you just do some research. You can see the effect on the plant. People really, really, really dislike Monsanto. And they dislike the like monopoly position it has. They don't want it to grow any bigger. It's a little big, like a big pharma kind of idea of, oh no, it's a big corporation. And indeed, more like the anti-vax crowd doesn't really want GMOs. And I don't understand that position, but whatever. I think it's maybe a lack of education, but I don't know.
Well, if I could just throw my 2 cents in on the GMO on the rice thing, I don't disagree that it's a good thing to have a source of vitamin A in one's diet. I think it's sad that a population of people have found themselves in a situation where they don't have a ready source of that vitamin in their diet. I suspect up to a certain point in time they did, otherwise they wouldn't be where they are now. But I can't help but think that there's a couple of factors that have led to where they're at, such that they need a crop that's been modified in such a way that they can sustain themselves. So either it's the population has outgrown the soil's ability to provide for them, and now they're shipping in nutrient, and they're shipping in fertilizer, and they're shipping in things that are going to sustain the population. And don't get me wrong, that's the right thing to do, but at the same token, I think it only exacerbates the problem in some respects when they then become reliant on this specific grain on the majority of their diet. I guess my argument is to have a nice diverse diet that comes from a place where you don't have to worry about the price of oil affecting your ability to live.
Yeah, I agree, of course, but the areas affected with this have most of the time extreme poverty, and they developed this strain of rice because a lot of people had like a mono diet of rice and other stuff they could scrounge together, and that's why they missed. So, of course, people know they should try to eat more diversely, but the conditions in these places are just not don't have the infrastructure or the funding to do such things.
Exactly. And my concern, I guess, is that we're going to, in turn, create more places where people need these sorts of monocropped foods in order to survive, simply because they've become cheap and easy to make, and there's really no alternative once the soil's been depleted to a point where the only thing you can grow is GMO soy and then GMO corn and then GMO soy and then GMO corn. I mean, it makes up a huge portion of a lot of people's diets. I look at food packaging, and a lot of people don't know any better, and the results are obesity, diabetes, and the rest of it. We see here in America. Sure, go ahead.
Obesity as a result of, by virtue of it being GMO?
No. What I'm saying is that people become reliant on one specific crop, whether it be corn, rice, or soy, and then because they become reliant on a very cheap, staple, starchy, high caloric, low nutrient.
I don't know about America. Obviously, that's a choice. We're in a first world country where people can afford to make whatever choices they want. But as far as what I'm with what other people are saying, this stuff is cheap, and these people are in third world countries. Like, if they're going to subsist off of rice or wheat, it's better than subsisting off of nothing. Like,
absolutely. I want to 100% agree with you and only say this one thing. What is in your breakfast cereal? What is in the food that you eat? The fact that poor people in sub-Saharan Africa or in India or in places, third world countries, where they have to have these things to subsist, doesn't mean that we should be growing it necessarily here so that Joe Blow American can blow up and get to be about 400 pounds and then be a burden on not only himself but the people around him. That's all I'm saying. I mean, it's not as if we're growing, it's not as if there's not thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres devoted to GMO corn and GMO soy and GMO rice here in America that's being fed to Americans, right? I mean...
I just wanted to say that after the Dust Bowl, we basically learned our lesson. Farmers now let huge areas of wheat grow wild, and they find that enriches the nutrients even more. Farmers, the farming technology has gotten very good. I don't know if any of you've looked into it, but
it absolutely has. Yeah, absolutely. Technology is wonderful, and it'd be great if we could get that technology to the places where people are starving, such that they could benefit from it. We benefit from it here, and what we tend to do is to grow very large monocropped areas of cheap food, and it doesn't seem to be doing our population very much good when the two leading causes of death are heart disease and diabetes. That's all I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but it might be cheaper to grow it here. Our climate might be more conducive to crops here, and just cheaper to just surplus and export. I mean, yeah, I agree with you that people overeat here, and they're a burden on healthcare and a bunch of other things.
Pay farmers to stop growing food.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I would rather see us have it grown wherever it's most expedient to grow it, and then export the surplus rather than try to ship our John Deere tractors over to sub-Saharan Africa and let them manage it. I mean, that's ridiculous. And yeah, it's my understanding as well that agriculture yield has gotten exponentially better. So I'm all for feeding more people. That's wherever it's grown.
Yeah, it's not that we haven't gotten better at growing food. It's that what goes into growing food at this point has gotten kind of in conflict with the ecology. A lot of what goes into growing food is a lot of what people bitch about when it comes to climate change. It takes an awful lot of fossil fuels to make fertilizer, to run tractors, to run farms, to ship trains full of grain, to ship food, to grind flour.
But it must be a net positive, though, right? Because
yeah, it's not that it's not a net positive for the people who are doing it, but it's not a net positive in the long term, in that what you're taking out of the soil now and shipping to other places cannot be replaced.
Well, I agree with that, but the problem is if you don't do it, you'll starve.
Well,
Well, I
I
would
would like to
say
say
well,
that those nutrients can be replaced over time, and just like I said, with the what they do with the wheat fields that grow wildly, that helps replace the nutrients.
well, it depends on the nutrients you're talking about because nitrogen, yeah, it's really easy to plant things that fix nitrogen. Phosphorus and potassium are different. Those are the two other main things when it comes to growing plants. But you have a lot of micronutrients that aren't available except in the form of rock powders or industrial chemicals that are meant to replace these micronutrients that are vital for plant growth.
What are you suggesting? So if we deplete the ground, I obviously trust farmers to do what's best for them. They, like you said, they've learned their lesson from the Dust Bowl. If they have
I
figured
don't
out
think they have. I don't think they have.
Okay, if they haven't figured out crop rotation such that they could do better, which I always believe we could advance. But if we deplete the ground of any given nutrient that you're referring to, what's the problem there? Why is that bad? Why? Like what does that cost us? If some field in Arkansas has less potassium than it did before, why should I care?
Well, the problem is that a good majority of the food that you're going to consume, unless you grow it yourself, is going to come from some farm, and the farmer doesn't necessarily get paid by the amount of nutrient density of the food. The farmer gets paid by the weight of the food itself. So it doesn't help me as a farmer in Florida to have nutrient-dense tomatoes. What it really helps me to have is very dense, very durable tomatoes, such that the majority of them get to market, so that when they get thrown on a scale, you end up.
But it sounds like you're arguing a cost-benefit analysis. I don't doubt that locally grown food is probably more nutrient-rich. My question is, if you, in terms of scale, economies of scale, is it more profitable? Is it more expedient to get less nutrient-rich tomatoes than a few highly nutrient-rich tomatoes that are going to be prohibitively expensive for a lot of people?
Well, I guess it all depends on what you have for the intentions of yourself in the long run.
It sounds like it depends on your pocket, man. It depends on your pocket. You go into these inner cities, people don't got time to go to Whole Foods. I mean, I live in Milwaukee. I live in the Farm Belt. Wisconsin is a huge agriculture state, and a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford what you're talking about.
Well, let me give you an example, or let me give you a little bit of an idea as to where I'm coming from, so that you can understand where I'm at. I grew up poor as poor can be, trailer park poor. The only experience I had with any sort of growing anything was a small 10 by 10 foot garden plot. We had some tomatoes and we had some cucumbers. Over the time, I lost interest. Life, women, you know how it goes. Recently, I had the opportunity to buy a big chunk of land, not big, but big enough, where I could grow my own food. It takes a lot to do so, especially when you're doing everything with a pitchfork and a shovel, and you've got a couple of kids that you've got to, deal with on the day-to-day. I mean, I'm a stay-at-home farmstead dad, is the way I like to say it. And I grow 100% of my protein. I have all my meat, all my eggs, all my vegetables pretty much locked down. There are a few things dairy-wise that I buy from a store. I don't bring anything in as far as inputs into my system, but it requires of me the effort and the knowledge to make sure that those systems stay balanced so that I don't end up with an excess of bullshit. You get what I'm saying?
Nobody's going to argue that your lifestyle is drastically more healthier than somebody going to KFC to get their chicken. Nobody's arguing that. We're talking about means. Of course, if I'm willing, able, and
second part. I want to give you this. Let me give you the second part. I live below the poverty line, far, far below the poverty line, to the point where if you looked at the bank statements and you looked at the way I live, you couldn't make it work. The only reason that I'm able to make it work is because I've diversified my food system such that in any way, shape, or form, if any one thing were to fail, I have the ability to make up for it in another way. The problem we have now, currently, on the large scale, is that if we had a crop failure in any way, shape, or form, people starve. If you have in your area a period of time of drought such that the entire area is wiped out of corn, we have a problem. And then because nobody has had anything else to eat, the corn crop is gone, it becomes a problem not only for you in your area, but for people in my area that rely on the food that grows in your area.
Definitely ahead of the curve. It's like nobody. That's a big if we have a massive crop failure of all the wheat in Wisconsin. Like that's a huge. Of course, you've got the skill set and you've cultivated time to learn, and you're past the learning curve, and nobody's denying that. I'm just saying that that's a big if. It's like saying if the government collapses, people who don't have guns and ammo won't be ready. It's like, well, yeah, sure. I guess they won't. Like it's like, but it ain't. It's not gonna. Like it's like a lot of people are living day to day, and like. If you have found a way to subsist on a meager budget, more power to you, and I would like to see more people probably move out of the city into rural Wisconsin and do what you're doing, but it's not going to happen. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't be beneficial to them. I think it would. I'm going to let Joris said he wanted to say something, so I'm going to let him jump in.
You mean?
Yeah, you.
Oh no, no, I was kind of following this discussion and I thought it was kind of interesting. No, but I wanted to ask
the other guy, not
the other George. All right.
Yeah. Is it Joris or George? I can't see that far. In between Quantum and Good.
Well, his name is Joris.
Oh, okay, yeah. He was texting. He said he wanted to say something. I don't know. He got quiet.
And I just want to be clear. I'm not against developing means by which to feed starving people. My concern is that when we accept for ourselves in the first world that which is meant for the third world as our standard, and then become a burden to ourselves. Diabetes, heart disease, problems are easily solved with proper diet, nutrition, exercise. Jesus, people, get off your ass. But like, and I don't want to glorify what I'm doing either. It's just what I do. It's what feels right for me. So I don't want to make anybody feel like, you know, if they're in a different spot that they should feel like they're doing what I'm doing. It's just that this is where I'm comfortable, and I see where a lot of people who visit or who come to where I'm at, for a long while, well, I'm getting off track here for a second, but for a long while I had people visiting, family, friends, and relatives who would say, you're crazy for moving out here and doing what you're doing. Like, there's nobody out here, there's nobody to talk to, you have no, you know, you're isolated. But once they got to see what I was producing for myself, the quality of life I was having, I think it started to dawn on them that it wasn't really about the hustle and bustle that made their lives worth getting up for, but rather what was driving them day to day was just to survive. I think stuffing food in the face. You know what I mean? I just got to eat, so I just got to work, and so I just got to get to bed by a certain time, and it's a rush, rush, rush. I don't want anybody in the world to feel like you have to rush, 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 because you only get one life, and if you only get one, then you should be able to enjoy it. And I don't think that we should treat ourselves like slaves or like people.
Well, I don't like using that. I don't like using that word slave in the corporate context. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. But I'm gonna go back to what you just said. That's a valid point. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when you force yourself to do something that you wouldn't otherwise do because you have to eat, it's a form, in my mind, of mental slavery, in that you do not have a choice in whether or not you're going to wake up tomorrow and go to work. You have to, and you don't have a choice.
Yeah,
and
man.
It's something you commit yourself to, and I don't mean it in any kind of, you know, whatever way, but it's just, to me, I've gotten away from it for a little while now to be able to look at it and say, you know what?
Hold on. You had me right up. I agree with everything you said up to we shouldn't use that which is intended for the third world and first world. I agree with all that. But now you're talking about value stuff, a value proposition. This is a lifestyle choice. I like the hustle and bustle. I live in the heart of downtown. I like going to work every day, and that's what gives me value. Some people are off the grid sort of people, self-sustaining. I don't have the tolerance for that, man. I've never done manual labor a day in my life. I don't see me.
No, what I mean is that I don't want people who don't want to wake up and do the hustle and bustle to have to do the hustle and bustle. There are those people who are going to wake up, tomorrow morning and say like, "Fuck, it's Monday," and I want to do Monday because Monday blows because it means there's 4 more days of this before I can just not do this. And I don't want anybody in a place where we live, where we can sit and talk the way we're talking with the technology that we have, to have to suffer through that just to eat when it's not really necessary. You know what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but I just want to point out that like it's more like I like being able to go to the store and have all those things on a shelf. It seems more. It's like I like the idea of division of labor rather than assuming the burdensome learning curve to learn how to fish, to learn how to harvest, to learn how to do all these things. I like being able to just exchange my denominated currency or whatever it is and go to a store and get all those things in one trip. I like that, and not everybody's different. So I mean, we got a little bit off topic from where we started with food, but I think back to food. I think it's a good thing. I think the division of labor, the division of crops. I think mass crops are a good thing, generally a good thing. I don't see it hurting my community in Wisconsin, where outside of Milwaukee and Madison being the 2 biggest cities, it's almost all farmland, and I don't see any farmers complaining. They seem to have a pretty good standard of living, and we both benefit from each other. I bring to them the things that I can get from the inner cities, financial services, other, most of the jobs are located in big cities. I bring something to them, they bring something to us, and I think it's mutually beneficial. That's just me personally. I think all the things that you're talking about, the technology we have, aren't a product of being self-sustaining. They're a product of trying to derive capital from offering a service or product for a profit, and that's where pretty much all the benefit of my life comes from. So I'm a huge advocate.
Right. What does that mean? I guess just long term. I guess I guess maybe I have my mindset a little bit further off in the long term, where there's a lot of talk about climate change and what are we going to do about the future, energy shortages, this, that, and the other thing, and I just wonder about a lot of the services that we find ourselves very reliant on becoming very expensive in the very near term when fuel prices and the like go up. It seems like when you have things very, very centralized, it makes things difficult for people who are on the outer ends. Sure, go ahead, George.
Because you live in the United States, you have 250 million, 270 million people.
Like 330, yeah, 330.
I live in the Netherlands. We have 18 million people, but compared to the United States, you have a lot more space in the United States. What you're proposing for people to do, it's basically impossible here in the Netherlands. So, and I understand it, but I understand where you're coming from, and it's a good thing. But we have 7.2 billion people in the world, and it's increasing, and they predicted something that in 20 years' time we will have, I don't know, 15 billion people, something like that. I'm not quite sure on the numbers, but it's increasing.
In 2020.
Yeah,
the prediction.
If everybody starts to do what you are doing, we wouldn't be able to feed everyone. We need big companies to feed everyone, because else we will not have enough space.
Well,
or else we'll have to do something about the population.
Mind if I butt in? Okay. A point about what you had said about the nutrients depletion in certain crop fields. I live in the Netherlands as well, and we have very rich ground. We have this country has been flooded 100 million times, and all of the soil we have is clay, and lots of problems here in the Netherlands are maybe the opposite of what you have in certain parts of the United States. We have too much nutrients in the ground, and then a process called eutrophication takes place, which messes up your water ecosystems. But I think enriching pieces of ground, which we have the global trade in micronutrients and nitrous-based ingredients, I think that's something we'll manage. I think that's on an infrastructure level that's manageable, and we're developing different kinds of plants. We use nutrients more effectively by only making sure the plants prioritize the leaves and the fruits and minimizing growth in the vertical. I think that's a promising direction we can optimize our crops in. I think that's a problem we'll manage to solve. But I think that the amount of ground is more of a problem we're going to have. And secondly, George posed a question on big corporations patenting or copyrighting, as he said it, plants. And this is a kind of a more ethical issue we have going on in biotechnology spheres. Namely, it is allowed in the United States to patent a plant if you modify it for certain criteria, and even certain animals. If you, for example, there's a couple of mice which have been altered so that they express green fluorescent protein, which is a protein which glows green, and they have been allowed to make a patent for that, or goats who make a protein excrete that in the milk, which can be used to treat certain people, and they are allowed to do that because if you try to make such an organism or change a goat, for example, it costs prohibitively much money. So like you can make up to like $1 billion, and they are allowed to patent it because a patent lasts 10 years, because like 6 or 7 of those years are spent researching and developing a GMO or an organism. And those couple of years they have left, like 3 or 4, are just to make sure the company can earn its money back. So to make sure these companies are incentivized to develop a product, or else they would stick all that money in making such a product, then instantly get copied and lose all the money. So that's to make sure that companies will invest money in such development projects.
Yeah, but aren't there like kind of cheat ways around it with part patents? You basically patent a part or something, and then a few years later on down the road you patent another part because you added something new, and then you can keep up your patent for, I don't know, 80, 100 years. I'm not 100% sure about the process, but
well,
that's all basically what you also see in the medical industry, and why medicines. I know research costs a lot of money, and that's why medicines are so costly. But it's something like corn, and making it more useful and able to produce more corn. When you start patenting corn, and you start changing the corn over time. The prices stay up because they still have to get their money back for the research they've done. But I'm not 100% sure they always are so honest, because the main goal of these companies always is firstly also to make money.
Well, yeah, I think the patent rules are very strict, so I don't know how much leeway you have to sneak around those. So I think that's a minimal problem, but we need to, you of course, need to make sure people don't try to pull a fast one and try to do that. But I don't think that's a particularly big problem right now. But I don't know.
How long do these patents last?
10 years, and you can't renew them or make them last any longer. So 10 years, that's the end. And there's a couple of rules. It needs to be, I don't know at the top of my head, it needs to be new and innovative. It's not allowed to be a logical progression from an earlier system. So if you have a wheel, make some slight adjustments everyone can see you're going to make, you can't patent that. So I think it's reasonably airtight to make sure people don't abuse the system.
All right.
But you need to be careful for those kind of things, of course.
Yeah, because it's. I think I'm just like any common man. I'm always doubtful when looking up at big corporations. Like you can see what Microsoft has done over the years, trying to be trying to be the one main control in the PC market in the of Windows, and so you always have a natural dislike for big corporations when you are not in such a big corporation, then it's difficult to understand what they're actually doing, of course.
Well, yeah, I think a little bit of distrust is warranted, but I don't think you should impose a malice on these people that they want to, do something bad with it. I think they're quite reasonable in the end, but you need to be careful. These people, the company is there to make money, and those people who are in those companies don't necessarily mean to do anything bad, but might inadvertently do something.
Yeah, but that's the problem with a big company, of course, is that the single individual may be thinking he's doing the right thing, but the big company as a whole is not a single person. It's a big mechanism on itself, of course. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say just look at the banks. So we're kind of closed on subjects now, or
we exhausted that avenue. Then I think we kind of want to off onto a little bit of an interesting tangent. There's other topics that was covered last week that we could cover now. In particular, is it the one that they covered was, is it a contradiction to believe in God but also to believe in science?
I don't think it's necessarily a contradiction, but I don't see how you could have those two worldviews together. But I have never been religious, so I guess it's just a matter of perspective on that one.
I saw an odd documentary a few months ago. I won't be able to look it up because I don't recall exactly what it was, but it was with Dawkins, and he was interviewing a Catholic priest in Rome, I think it was, and he was part of the Science Council in Rome or something like that. And he was asking him questions from his perspective, coming from him being the writer of the God Illusion and such books, and that Catholic priest was a very smart man. You could hear it, and he was a scientist himself. But basically, every answer he gave screamed, "I am an atheist." But in the end, he was still a person believing in God, and that it was so strange to see. He saw no contradiction, but he was very articulate enough also to explain it very well. And that was his positive thing, that he was such a smart person and being to explain the difference so very well. But a lot of people are not articulate enough to explain the difference.
Well, I think it's perfectly possible if you don't, scientists don't know everything about every other field of science, so people can be smart in one area and idiots in another, so.
Yeah, that's true. I know a lot of little things, but I'm not a scientist, so you go with the knowledge you have and the books you've read and the knowledge you've gained. So. And he was knowledgeable on both subjects, both science, being a scientist, and the Bible very well. And he also disagreed with a lot of doctrines the Roman Catholic Church itself had. So that was kind of contradictory because he was such a high up guy within the Roman Catholic structure because he worked in Rome itself. So.
I mean, personally, I do think there's a contradiction. I mean, I had a problem with what was a little bit of what was being said on the last Magic Sandwich show in terms of in terms of there being an intersection between what science doesn't understand and what religion doesn't understand. That's sort of free for everyone. I don't think that's reasonable, because science aims to understand everything, right? It doesn't mean we do, but the ultimate aim of science is that we come up with a complete understanding of everything around us. So I don't believe there's any window at all open for any sort of religious thought, and it's more a sense of a God of the gaps argument, that what we don't know is going to get more abstract and not necessarily smaller, because we will know that we know less as we know more, but it'll be harder to come up with any sort of religious justification.
For me, it goes back to the discussion I had with Ozymandias about 2 or 3 times now. That basically I say I look at evolution, and I look at the evolution of religion. I look at biological evolution, and I look at how cultures evolved all over time, from 300,000, 200,000, 100,000 years ago to how we are now as a human species on the world. And I take a blank position. So I won't say there is a God, there is no God. Basically, I take a blank position first. So that's different for me personally than saying there is a God or there is no God. I take a blank position, and then I look at, from a scientific perspective, as far as I am able as a common man to interpret it. And then I notice the humankind evolved. We evolved speech. We invented fire. We invented the wheel. We invented writing, and all through that period we as a social animal developed culture. We evolved art, and within that structure there's also the invention of religion, as I see it, and first there was religion, and then we invented gods for those religions, and then we invented monotheism, the single, the Abrahamic gods, and that's how I see it. But the religion part of how we evolved as a human species on this planet, I see no evidence within the whole scientific spectrum which I observe that there should be a God. So if I take the blank position first and do not say there is a God or there is no God, I take a blank position, but within the science that evolved from the beginning of time, for me basically, if there is nothing that tells me that there is a God, then my end conclusion is that there is no God, and that's my position. So I don't know. It's difficult. That there are really some real smart scientists that say that there is a God, and you have Tyson from the Cosmos series. What's his full name?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yes, Neil deGrasse Tyson. There was I saw a video this week, I think it was, in which he basically explained that he hated being labeled an atheist. And I thought that was kind of odd, because when you see his series, the Cosmos, everything from this screams I am an atheist, but he does not like to be labeled an atheist because he basically prefers to avoid the discussion, and that's also very strange. It doesn't make sense to me.
I'm not sure whether Katz, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, I kind of got distracted in the chat. Did you want me to bring that topic up?
Oh yeah, why not?
Well, basically, I had this thought: if we're a mass of atoms governed by universal forces, gravity and whatnot. Do we have free will, or or since these forces will always um, have predictable outcomes?
Well, the philosophical idea which you're aiming at is, as far as I know, is called determinism, which states that if you know the begin values of the universe, you can predict what the universe is at any given time. So if you know all the values, you know what is going to happen, and then you have, of course, all kinds of different other views on these this problem. But I think, well, this is a nice reason. I think most people, it's a good thing if more people followed at least some kind of philosophy class in some kind of educational setting, because I learned some general ideas about this topic. But if you're a determinist, if you're a hardline determinist, free will doesn't exist. That's not everything is determined. So, but there are different streams on the compatibilism, which states that determinism is up to true to until a point. There is still some place for free will, and that's in most of the cases they argue that in the form of quantum theory. So there's a random process in there which they claim should be responsible for free will. But I think you could say I'm a determinist myself. I think free will, as most people think of it existing, doesn't really exist. But I don't know how I should mesh this idea with quantum physics. I don't think anyone knows. So I think it's an interesting topic, in which we ultimately don't know what is true and what is not.
Well, that's been my racking my brain, because if we don't have free will, there's only a varying degree of outcomes in which everything is destined to repeat itself. But since history has shown us that we do repeat ourselves and we don't repeat ourselves, it's kind of it's kind of funny to think, because the brain is made up of atoms and this chemical electrochemical process that is also governed by the forces of the universe. So
yeah, if you argue for it, there's well, of course I think so, because I'm a determinist. But there's no if you don't believe in some kind of soul or that kind of thing, it's really hard to argue that there should be some entity which can interfere in the brain, which is not also governed by the laws of nature. So that's, I think most people will probably end up in determinism if you do that.
I mean, with regards to this, I mean, I'm not sure it even really matters whether the universe is deterministic or not. But by the way, I don't know whether the universe is deterministic. I mean, with quantum theory, you can sort of rationalize a quantum form of determinism depending on the interpretation you have of quantum mechanics, and with the many worlds interpretation, you can justify that, but to an extent anyway. But with this notwithstanding, does it really matter whether the universe is deterministic or not? Because whether or not there's some sort of random process that governs your actions and choices, and to be honest, the quantum effects probably don't have that much impact on your choices, because your choices are macroscopic anyway. But does it really matter whether those processes are random or whether they're governed by some predefined variables? In both cases, you don't have this sort of free will as such, regardless of whether it's deterministic or not.
Well, yes, for experience of this world, it doesn't matter if you're the free will kind of person. But
So I'm not quite sure what you mean by
those
that.
classes, if you don't think people have free will, certain kinds, if you look at the justice system, certain kinds of punishments do not really make any sense anymore. You can't, if you look at a person, if you think the person has free will and the person has chosen to do an action, you can justify being, mad at the person, taking revenge or something. But if you don't think that person has free will, it's really difficult to justify imprisoning that person because of a decision that person made. So
I could justify it by saying
there's lots
the
of
system of is reacting to that individual's actions.
Well, yeah, you can just okay. If you're determinist, of course, you know your reactions are determined, so you can justify it by that. But that's not a real justification. Most people will accept it.
But I have another. I have a problem with this reasoning though. That's probably more. It's probably easier to explain. But I don't think any sort of. Firstly, I don't think that we put people in prison for punishment. I know some people subscribe to this, but I don't think punishment really has that much point. There are reasons that we put people in prison, but I don't think punishment is a good one of those reasons. So I think regardless of this argument, we should imprisonment is still a good idea. I mean, sorry.
But it determines what kind of imprisonment you're trying to do. If you're how the prison system in Holland and most, I think, Nordic kind of European countries is focused at, and it shocks a lot of U.S. people or people who live in other parts of the world. Is if you see a Dutch, I think it's a more comfortable living environment than I think maybe 25% of the people who live in America. The very people who live in absolute poverty, and they have televisions, they have game stations, they can talk to each other, they have gaming rooms, and if you look at it from a percentage, if you think they have free will, that seems to conflict with most people's feelings that those people don't deserve such a thing. But if you're a determinist, you think, okay, well, there's a couple of reasons why we would want to lock up people. Want to protect society. You want to.
But hang on. I have a problem with this because regardless of whether I'm a determinist or not, there are some very good reasons why the Nordic Scandinavian system is something to be desired. Because I mean, for instance, let's start with the big guns. The recidivism rate of Nordic Scandinavian prison systems are very, very good. So the sort of the idea that if you treat people like animals, they behave like animals, seems to have some validity. Basically, the Nordic Scandinavian prisons do actually work, and the people that go into them are more likely to reform than, for instance, an American one. So this is a very good justification for the Nordic system, and I think you can make your case on this argument alone.
Well, yeah, of course, if you're just a pragmatist that just looks at, okay, what system works the best, and then chooses that, yeah, of course, you don't need to talk about free will or any of those kinds of problems. So, in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's just a point on which you need to find out how you think the world works. So it's not really applicable in most cases, because you can indeed look at the results and think, well, I would prefer such a system because the results are better. But then you get all kinds of problems with utilitarianism and other ethical systems. But
to be fair, I think I probably am a utilitarian, if I'm honest.
I think most people are to a point. Most people, yeah. For example, we had a lecture on ethics in biotechnology, and the case came up, of course, of animals used for testing. What most people tend to do is they tend to be very pragmatic with the lower classes of animals. Bacteria. They're like, oh, I don't care. What's the result? Oh, okay, well, do that. And the more it moves up to the higher level animals, to mammals and those kind of things, people think of a more moral reasons why we shouldn't do that. We should take care of them, etc., etc. So that's most of the time how these kind of systems, work. People you don't really tend to care about. People tend to be very utilitarian. I don't know how to make that word work like that. So I think it's interesting, but that also depends on whether you're a religious person, because people tend to have a different moral system if they believe a couple of rules in that.
Well, maybe the system, evolution system developed empathy, for the fact that it works within the boundaries of society. So it's like you can be very deterministic and and still believe in empathy and being caring, because it was the system. It was necessary for the survival of the human species. That that we care for one another and look out for one another.
Well, I think that's of course very important in evolution. This development of ethical and moral systems, and I'm trying to find a Dutch biologist who made some very interesting did some very interesting research in ethical systems in monkeys.
I have a question, just briefly, returning back to this determinism thing and relation to morality. My issue is, if we do a thought experiment, we have one universe that's deterministic and one that isn't, and let's say that they're both basically the same in terms of they both have human life or whatever. Would there be any measurable difference between the two systems? What I'm asking is, would there be any way of telling whether we had free will or not? Would it make any difference at all? And if it doesn't make any difference, then why are we even having this conversation?
Well, first we'd have to figure out if we knew what consciousness was, if we had a firm definition of that.
Well, it also depends on what kind of free will are you getting at. You need to define the term in order to look if you can see a difference. But I don't know if you can ultimately see a difference, which in the end doesn't really matter, as I said, unless you're trying to base ethical arguments on the presupposition that a person has a free will to choose whatever the person wants. If you don't think a person has that, you can't hold the person accountable as if they had it. So it's only a big as a problem as you want to make it. Actually, I think.
I mean, if we want to talk about accountability, then we can try and put some sort of real world implications into this. So let's look at drugs, in particular alcohol, because obviously that affects your behaviour, it affects your brain. Arguably, you're a different person when you're drunk. So, do you think people should be held less accountable if they're when they're drunk compared to when they're sober? But less accountable for their actions, assuming, of course, it is legal to.
I think you will. The problem is you need to. Or I think you need to hold people accountable for getting themselves into a state which then is a problem. But I think you can be more understanding of a person's actions when they're drunk. If a person gets in an accident when they're drunk, you know that they got in an accident because they were drunk. You don't accuse them as being a bad driver just because they're of being a stupid person for driving when drunk. So I think you need to hold that in your mind when you try to explain behavior if a person is inebriated, like with alcohol. But
Okay, so here's a sort of scenario for you lot to consider. It's an immoral scenario. So let's say that you have a person that's never been drunk in their lives. Let's say that someone that's teetotal, someone that never wants to be drunk, and someone spikes their drink, and they're drunk, and then while they're drunk they commit, I don't know, assault, rape, whatever. They commit some sort of crime. Would you hold that person responsible for that crime? Because I've removed the condition that the person is responsible for getting drunk, because they would never under any normal circumstances do that.
Well,
So
I would say that that they weren't responsible because their inhibitions was taken away from them forcefully.
I don't think I would probably hold them accountable for that. Throw it on a charge of temporal insanity kind of a thing. No, but that's what I say. Their reasoning capabilities and their entire way they saw the world on that point was completely different, and so I don't think you can hold a person in that kind of situation accountable for something they did. But on the other hand, it feels slightly wrong for not doing so. So difficult situation.
Yeah, I think you could argue that in this case, if it wasn't for a malicious intent of a third party, then the incident would never have happened. So you could sort of make that argument. I think that's a very difficult one. I'm not sure if such a case is ever likely to happen in the future. It seems a very unlikely sort of scenario. But it would be interesting to see how a court does deal with such a situation if it ever does occur. I'm not sure if anyone knows about any sort of situation like this that has happened.
I think there has been, and I think the person that drugged them got charged with murder. But I'm not too sure. But I think that has happened in the past.
Well, perhaps not on alcohol, but you see in the past it has happened a lot in which a murderer or a criminal in whatever crime he committed tries to minimize his deeds by claiming he was insane. And that happens basically every day in court. Because I was insane, I am less culpable of the crime I committed. And that's the question, that's the point where you will end up. Was he insane? And if he is insane... Yes?
Because can you ever hold them accountable for something they do?
When he is...
That's more...
Yeah. But from that might work from his perspective, but that does not work for society, because society as a whole needs the justice system to protect society. So if you have somebody that might be criminally insane and less culpable for his crime because he is insane, you would still need to protect society.
I think in some cases it comes down to whether or not the person is likely to do the same thing again. There are instances where individuals kind of fly off the handle and are temporarily insane and do something that's very regrettable, but are then from there forth otherwise normal people. And then there are those people who are kind of teetering on the edge of sanity, and then they kind of snap, do something that's regrettable, and then claim the insanity defense only to get out and kind of be back on that teetering thing where it's, well, maybe I'll be insane today or maybe I won't. I think you need to protect people from the people who are likely to reoffend and maybe rehabilitate as best you can those people who are having these temporary issues. Like if you're drugged with something that causes you to do something insane, you probably shouldn't be held to as high of a standard as somebody who would do that in a sober mind. But at the same token, if you're doing something equally horrible in a mental state that's not a drug-induced mental state, just a mental state, then you kind of need to determine, is this person likely to do that again, or is this a one-time thing where we can fix it and reintegrate them? If they're likely to repeat, then you do have a responsibility to lock them up.
Well, that's one of the difficult points, of course, because you can never tell if somebody
It's perfectly
is drunk.
justifiable in the communistic system to imprison people for, as I said, to rehabilitate those people and to protect society. But I think it's probably smart to realize that if the arguments for detaining people, if you're a person who thinks we have free will, as opposed to a person who thinks you don't have such a thing. But in the end, the effects are basically the same. You know, we have a justice system. No sane person.
There have been cases where people have had brain tumours that have changed their personality, and they've gone on. I think there's been cases. I don't know whether it might have even been murder, and then the brain tumour was removed, and they were released on the argument that it was the brain tumour that caused it to happen. I read another really interesting case. And I think it was something really quite bizarre. It was some people on a chat room, and as far as I can tell, there was sort of this man pretending to be a woman, someone else that was a real person in real life, and she convinced this other man to perform some sort of BDSM type act on her, and with the details of her house, and then he went and did it, but he couldn't be charged with rape because on the basis that he was. Did people see? I mean, I can't quite believe this happened. It's really kind of convoluted case, but there's this other guy that pretending to be her, and then while pretending to be her, said that he wanted him to perform a BDSM act on her, with like a safe word or something, and then obviously she didn't know about it, so he went to her house and did it, and she didn't realise, but he couldn't be charged with rape because it was actually the other guy's fault. So do you charge the other guy with rape even though he didn't actually? Interesting case. What do people think? And this actually happened.
I've heard of cases like on Craigslist where somebody who's pissed at a relative will give the relative's address up on Craigslist and say, yeah, I'm having a rough time and I just want to get everything out of this house. The house is abandoned. And they wait until the person is at work. They say, come clean out the house, take whatever you want. I just gotta get as much shit out of the house as I possibly can before the landlord evicts me. So the person gets up in the morning, goes to work, and then they come home and find their house completely empty. I mean, like sinks ripped out, pipes ripped out of the walls, and the whole bit. Just because somebody else decided that, to hell with you, pal. I'm gonna make your day a living nightmare, and it ends up becoming quite a thing.
It's like a crime by proxy, then, isn't it? So I guess the legal system would hope that the legal system would charge the person that's coerced, sort of committed identity fraud in a sense, as with the same crime that they committed.
I can't imagine being the person caught in the middle who's just like, what the hell just happened here? Like, I thought I got a free sink and some copper piping, and all of a sudden now I'm brought up on charges? What the fuck's going on?
Cops breaking down your door and shit.
I swear to God, the sink was free.
I mean, this sort of thing happens quite a lot. I mean, there was a documentary that I watched. I think it was called Tall, Hot, Blonde. I think the documentary was called that, and it was one of these really bizarre situations. And as far as I can gather, there was this girl
um, and her mother, actually pretended to be her. With the suit, and she went around the internet with the pseudonym Tall Hot Blonde with her daughter's avatar, and she played these two different men against each other, to making them jealous to the extent that one of these men killed the other one, and so one of the men was charged with murder. She wasn't charged because at this point there wasn't really anything. She didn't actually do anything against the law, even though she was sort of the distal cause for the death. And of course, the daughter, I feel really sorry for her after all this, having to be in the middle of it with her mother doing these awful things. But no, the mother wasn't charged, but the guy that killed the other guy was charged with murder. I guess rightly he should have been, but maybe I think she should have been charged as well. Has anyone heard of this? If you Google Tall Hot Blonde documentary, you might be able to find this case. It's quite an interesting one.
I recall it vaguely.
I haven't heard of it, but I don't think that if she's like, I don't think she could be brought up on charges if she's like not lying to them. But if
I mean, she was lying. She was pretending to be her own daughter.
You could possibly make a case on that, but I'm not sure the standard would be.
There was something similar in the U.S. where a mother was pretending to be her daughter, and she was bullying her daughter's classmates online to the point where one of her daughter's classmates actually committed suicide. And through the investigation, they found out that the mother had all these false accounts in her daughter's name and was harassing these people like incessantly, horribly. And then they ended up bringing the mother up on charges, and I think subsequently the daughter, because she had some hand in it. But it seems a rather strange phenomenon that people would actually take their online world and bring it to the real world and do that kind of It's like the horrible things that trolls do online in real life. You just can't believe that like someone would actually do it in real life.
Yeah, it's just like, how horrible of a person do you have to be to involve your daughter in something that could get you sued, could get your daughter sued, and ruin their life? You're like, whoa, that's like people that can't control themselves. It's like the fathers that, I don't know if you've heard of this phenomenon, but there's been a few cases where fathers have started rushing the field at sporting events and just tackling some of the other players. Like,
yeah, I've actually seen a couple of videos similar to that where Pop Warner kids, I don't know, the like 8 and 10-year-old or 12-year-old kids, and then their father comes rushing out of the stands and tackles some poor little kid that's making a run. And it's like, really, we're this serious about what's going on in our kids' lives that we need to intervene this much? I mean, first of all, it's just a game, and the kids are growing up, and second of all, you're making yourself look like an asshole in front of so many people.
yeah, I mean, I'd like to see them try that when they're like a teenager. So, some quarterback just floors them.
I think a lot of it is like, a lot of times parents have this, well, if I had a chance to live it over again, I would do such and such, or I would do this, or I would do that, forgetting the fact that their kids have not yet had the opportunity to make those mistakes, and so they see their kid on the field or in school or, in band or whatever it is, whatever venue the kid is performing in, they see them not doing as well as they think they should, and then they have to, like, Kanye West the whole thing, where they just make a big giant to-do about, what's just what kids do. And then kids, internalize that to the point where they think, like, oh my God, I'm not good enough, or my parents are taking my life this seriously. How serious should I be taking my own life if mom and dad think it's necessary to tackle the other kid on my behalf? It gets crazy, really fast.
Oh yeah, I can. Being a child from a family where you have an extremist fundamentalist dad. I can kind of see what those children had to go through. I was just like, someone needs to get that child away from that man.
Anyway, I think well we've done the 2 hours, so maybe we should close up now. I think it's been a good session. Hope people will join again in 2 weeks. Once again, obligatory. Please make sure you add the right version of me to your circles if you want a fortnightly invite. 'Cause a lot of people are still adding the wrong version. Like I say, in the subsequent months, we will gradually be transferring you over to the second channel. Well, that won't be happening yet. But please subscribe to the Supernatural Side Salad Show channel as well, because it'll help the overall effort. And I don't think we'll get 500 subscribers, but it's worth a shot.
Don't be such a pessimist.
Never say never.
Yeah.
We can do it. We can do it.
You can do it. You can do it.
Can
We're
we
just-
get a link?
We're just
Sure,
gonna
yeah.
talk about. We're just gonna talk about Tall Hot Blondes, a few shows, and we'll get a lot of subscribers.
Well, I mean, my own channel doesn't have 500. I don't know why they've changed the policy, but I can't get a custom URL on it until it reaches 500. But anyway, I think by September it'll all be sorted out. But until then, I might upload some videos on that channel. But before then, it's just going to be same as normal. In 2 weeks' time, we'll do another one. So thanks everyone for joining, and goodbye.
Till the